Calling to order the meeting of the Committee of the Whole. Have a roll call, please.
Honorable James Cowie.
Here.
Alderman Grumhouse.
Here.
Alderman Novit.
Here.
Alderman Widman.
Here.
Alderman Moore.
Here.
Alderman Morsch. Alderman Hanrahan.
Here.
Alderman Luby.
Here.
Chairman Palmer.
Here.
We have 8 present, 1 absent. Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the August 16th committee meeting. Could I have a motion?
So move for approval?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Next item is the report on the ad hoc and Park and Recreation CIP Financing Committee Capital and Operational Recommendations by Mary Van Ardsdale. Mary?
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I'd also like to take a moment just to introduce, I have some park board members here tonight that are in attendance. We have Chairman Robin Ford, Scott Shappy, Michelle Green, and Kurt Volkman with me. And I also have some of the recreation staff, the 2 superintendents, Wendy McKiernan and Dan Reeves, and our managers, Sally Swarthout, Joe Mobile, and Rob Carmichael. The presentation I'm going to do tonight is really a culmination of a lot of people's work, including David Grumhouse's and Greg and the rest of the group that was on the ad hoc committee that started last summer, and then followed by a lot of work that was done by the park board and the staff. So it's a pleasure here to kind of bring everything back around after 9 months of work and share that with you tonight. So I'll go ahead and get started. I know you had a write-up in your packet as well as this presentation, so I'm not going to go through every slide in depth, but I wanted to highlight some of them to kind of share some of the critical junctures that we have had. The first one is that why we are really facing some of the challenges that we have with the Park and Public Land Fund, and it really goes back to the fact that in the past it was funded from impact fees, telecommunication tax, grants and donations. There's been no property taxes or real estate transfer tax to help fund the capital needs of the Recreation Department. In fiscal year 2008, the telecommunication tax was reallocated to the general fund. We have declining impact fees as the community has become more built out, and the economy collapsed, unfortunately, resulting in less revenue from development and other city revenue streams or private donations. In particular, we used to have a 5-year fund forecast that you saw a year ago had projections that we were going to be getting in about $3 million for the Laurel Avenue and Barra development and impact fees, and that was really what was anticipated to carry us forward over the next 3 to 5 years. And then when that money with the economy collapse went away, that's really why this became a critical issue instead of something we had a little bit more time to focus on. So that really has changed the timetable greatly for the conversation that we started this past year. And also grant opportunities because of the economy and cutbacks everywhere, especially a lot of grants that come to Parks and Recreation are from state type grants, and those are getting more and more difficult to receive. So then what happened was the city decided to form the ad hoc resolution, or the ad hoc committee, I should say, that passed a resolution in July of 2009, and they were given really these 5 critical project goals for that group to work on. And I won't go through all of them, but you know the basic goal here was to find fiscal tools to address us from an operational and a capital perspective. And so they did a great deal of work to look at these 5 areas and come back with some recommendations. So the committee did come back to City Council and reported in October. They finished their report in November. They reported to City Council, and that was in November of '09. And they had identified 13 areas that they wanted staff and the park board to look at further and in more depth. And they were operational areas to look at to strengthen our financial revenue streams and look at expense side, as well as capital side of things, so that we comprehensively were looking at the Parks and Recreation system to find the best financial plan to go forward. And so they gave us 13 areas to look at. And from that, then, the park board and staff spent 9 months collecting different data, researching opportunities, and implementing changes to help strengthen this. And so we focused in 2 different areas, like I mentioned, the operational adjustments and the capital. In the operational adjustments, this past year, this list of items that were in your packet had a net change for our department of over $250,000. And I really have to say that I think we looked into all 13 areas with sincerity, a lot of depth. What we did was we broke up every initiative that the ad hoc group had given us, and we assigned a park board member with staff to do the in-depth research on that particular topic, come back to the group as a whole and make a proposal and discuss it so that we could kind of, determine our course of direction that we could go and make adjustments as quickly and as efficiently as we could. So in these areas, we did a lot, whether it was recreation programs, we did cost of service studies, as you know, we merged our forestry and park section, we developed internship programs, we outsourced some work where we could on the park side. We started developing our parent boards and volunteer boards a little more thoroughly and asking them to focus on ways they could support their specific areas. So we really did a lot of adjustments in 9 months on the operational side of things, and I'm pleased to say I think that has been moving very well.
What was the biggest area that you found a savings in?
The biggest area is when we merged the forestry and park section because we eliminated a supervisor's position there, and that was about $120,000 savings of that $250,000. So that was pretty substantial. We also outsourced, some other work, the mowing of the passive parks we did this year, and cleaning of the bathrooms, which was a $20,000 savings. And then we rented the tennis courts was another $9,000, and so kind of all slowly adds up through that, those dollar amounts. Then we also looked at it from a capital enhancement, and these do get a little bit more challenging because we're talking about significant dollars, and it took us a little bit, we still have a little bit more work to finish here, but we did implement a sport field improvement fund, which we feel will generate approximately $60,000 a year. We began pursuing endowment funds for the Wildlife Discovery Center and the sailing program. These were specifically highlighted by the ad hoc group as areas they wanted us to look at, and they are very unique services and have more opportunity, I think, for us to go after specialized donations and museum-type grants. So that is one area that we really started to work on. We've already received $25,300 to date in that, those endowment funds, and we think we'll be continuing to move forward, but we had to put some good structure in place before we could go out and start looking for the funds as well.
Mary, what's the improvement fund, the sport field improvement fund?
Basically what that was, any group, internal or external, that uses the outdoor sport fields, we came up with a fee that was based on their registration number. So it's $20 for any outside group that utilizes our fields during the year, and they turn in their rosters to us, and then we will invoice them $20 per person on their rosters that will then go into a fund based on the type of sport that it is. We will pull those into a separate fund, and then we'll utilize those to put money back into the infrastructure that the sport teams use. Right now, what they've been paying for is strictly their maintenance costs, lining the fields, mowing the grass, irrigation, repairs, that kind of thing. So we haven't really ever gone after the capital side of it, and yet the biggest amount of users for our sport fields are outside groups. When I say outside groups, that means non-recreation department groups. They're all Lake Forest groups. They all meet the residency requirements. So they're all Lake Forest-based organizations, but they've never ever had to really contribute that other than occasionally they would make donations. So this was a new program that we have already started to talk with all the organizations in town. They know we will be implementing it with the start of their new season this next year. We already added the fees to all of our recreation programs on top of their standard program fee. So we're going to collect our money starting this fall, and we'll start with all the other organizations at their next point of registration that they have.
So somebody signs up, a team signs up to play, and then they have a fee for the team that covers the daily maintenance of the field. And then you have, it's kind of an endowment fee that they're gonna pay at $20 a head that you put in the fund for infrastructure improvement later on.
Correct.
Changing the backstop or changing the clay on the pitcher's mound.
Correct.
Or something that's major.
Correct.
And then you just said you're now implementing that into all of the people who sign up. So if you sign up for a class, you also pay a $20 fee?
No, just in the programs that use the sport fields.
Just the sport
Yeah,
fields,
so if it's our
okay.
sport field programs, they're contributing towards that as well. So we did it internal and external for sports groups. So, and then we will sit down with every group as a, conversation each year and say, what is your organization's priorities? Here's what we see as priorities, and see if we can come up to some, general agreement on what we would prioritize for the work and the money that we have available each year. So it's a start, to try to begin to address some of those kinds of things. So, so that was one we did. We also revised our capital expense for the sailing program by doing some different things with our replacement schedules on the sailing equipment. We have a naming rights policy that we'd like the city council to look at here in the next couple months. I think we've talked about how things and times have changed. It might be some time for us as a community to look at unique opportunities to allow that kind of support to come into our system. And I think Parks and Recreation is one that you see many times is embraced for those kinds of donations and those kinds of naming opportunities.
An
And we also-
example of that would be, do you have an example?
Well,
John
I
Luby
mean,
Field.
Cellular Field on
Co-
Deer
Costco-
Path Road or?
Costco Park.
Costco
Yeah.
Park?
you know, yeah, we talked about for Town Line, if we ever had a big donor come in for Town Line, we could certainly rename that, or if we wanted to rename some of our pavilions and our buildings at the time, we would redo pavilions, and, you know, we have, I think, a lot of opportunity with sport fields. In a lot of the towns around us, they name the sports fields after,
Rust-Oleum
family.
did Libertyville, or Vernon Hills, I think.
Vernon Hills.
And-
Rust-Oleum,
and so-
yeah.
And I know I push this at the committee levels. I think really Lake Forest has to think outside the box. The city of Chicago, quote unquote, shakes down, all the professional teams, for all the exits, and they adopt the garden. As you go down, you'll see bears and bulls and whatever. And I think we need to think outside the box on this one. And I know we've always, we can't put, certain names on certain places, but I think there's still room for us to look at that.
In Glenview, where I was at, each baseball field each year had an opportunity for putting a banner on the field that could be a sponsor for that year's naming of that particular field. And the parents love to, step up with their companies or with their, their connections that they had. And it was just a one-year thing. It was a small banner that went on the backstop, but it was a nice revenue stream. It wasn't huge, but it certainly helped, defray some of those kinds of things. And those are maybe opportunities, and that's to what extent we want to stretch that concept. Those are the possibilities that are there. So the naming policy that we'll give you will show the 4 different categories we had identified as possible opportunities, and we'll ask City Council to give us some feedback on that policy and if they like the concept and, want us to start to advertise it or, look for those kinds of donations.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talked a lot about this at the ad hoc, the view was that this was a good out-of-the-box opportunity. I think, the concern from some of us, from some people was, we don't want to have little signs for every little thing all around the place, and that we're looking for is big naming opportunities. So if we decide we wanted to put AstroTurf in at Deer Path, if someone would step in and do fund that, we would name a field after them,
The individual field, but not necessarily a
No,
park.
necessarily the park. I think we didn't set the parameters. We left that for Mary and the rest of the park board to sort of explore and obviously then bring back to the council. But, again, I don't think we want to get in a situation where we have 77 advertisements all over the outfield and at the baseball field or, hanging from the soccer goal. But, if there were big opportunities for big projects that we as a city needed to do, that quite frankly, we probably don't have the funds for, that we had to be open to something like that.
We had trouble with Babursky Park.
And so obviously we have an Adopt a Park program as another new concept that the mayor and past Mayor Rummel asked us to investigate. We'll be talking about that tonight as well. And the last thing is to conduct some neighborhood park meetings so that we could get some feedback and the priorities for the community before we finalize a list to bring back to City Council.
Mary, before you leave that one, can you refresh everybody's memory of the date of that?
That
public
is
meeting?
February 28th. It's Tuesday night, starting at 7 o'clock. It'll be at the Rec Center in Croya.
September.
The first half hour,
What was the day again?
September 28th.
I think she said February.
She did.
Okay.
So 7 to 8, 7 to 7:30, we're going to do an overview of our park system and our financial, picture that we have right now, and then we'll go break into breakout sessions in the gym where we'll have tables with all of our parks with information about our parks, what is there currently, ask for some feedback, share with them some of the challenges that might be coming up, and get some feedback from all the residents that attend. So we're hoping that that'll be a well-attended event and we can get some great awareness created with the community, as well as some feedback and help us prioritize when the park board sits back down and puts a list together that will come to City Council in November. So
So please try and attend if you're in town and available. I think that's going to be a really critical, important meeting.
Tuesday night. So
Tuesday night, September 28th. This next chart that's up here, I wanted to go over this really quickly with you. This is a 10-year picture of the Park and Public Land Fund. And just to clarify again, this is a Park and Public Land Fund. It does not include golf. I'm not talking about golf at all tonight. That's a whole separate fund, and we're going to be discussing that with the council in October. But this is just for the Parks and Recreation and capital needs. And here with the mouse, you can see the pink is our expense chart here. You can see how that has flowed, and then you can see the revenue. The two big spikes that we have here, this is from the revenue side, we got the impact fees from Amberling Woods and the Fit Morris developments at that time. And then, as you can see since then, and really, we've had very little growth of impact fees, and we've actually seen them drop off significantly since fiscal year '08, and not projected really past fiscal year '11. They're going to go flat, if not completely down. There'll be no monies coming in potentially from impact fees other than some very small, minor developments that we have. The expense side of it, though, does jump up here, and this one I wanted to point out. This expense here is the Town Line Community Park development, so that's why you see that that kind of swing around. But for the most part, we've been staying in this type of range here for our expenses, and it has been a challenge because we have exceeded our expenses, have exceeded somewhat our pace for the income coming in, but prior years of impact fees had helped us be able to do that, and now we don't have that type of support from the just impact fees.
So Mary, if we are talking about this program, is it call it a holding pattern somewhat until Vera and/or Laurel are developed and can generate some more funds, or do you envision this as being changes that are going to be, in a sense, kind of permanent, irrespective of what happens with Vera and
Well, I think
Laurel?
these changes will be permanent, and the reason I say that is we just don't have, as a community, I don't think, very many large parcels left to develop, and/or unique opportunities like these that we can predict comfortably. There might be others. Who knows what might happen with some other the private schools or anything in town, but hopefully nothing would change with them. But those are very unpredictable, and that's part of the challenge, I think, is we have all these assets. I know in the write-up that I put for you, we're maintaining over 600 acres, over 26 buildings and structures, and then, you know, all of the fields and stuff that are used and all the green spaces in town. It's a very large system that we have for the size of community that we have, but in actual reality is we haven't been keeping pace currently, but we have to continue to put some money towards it. We can't just keep deferring because we have, you know, assets that are already past their useful life in some situations. So this next is the 5-year fund forecast, and this is an update since the one that you would have seen as part of the budget process back in March, because what we did take out of here was the White Stable Vineyard projection. That had been predicted to come in here in fiscal year 12, and that was supposed to help us with funding approximately almost $1 million worth of impact fees from that. As council knows, that is very uncertain, so that has been pulled off as a potential. And so right now, the only thing we're showing coming in really from revenues is very minimal here, which is the bond proceeds that have tentatively been mentioned by the council as something that would happen in fiscal year 13. And then the other amounts that you see, it looks like we're getting a lot of grants in there, but it's not grants. What that is that, it should say grants, I believe grant/other, because in the fiscal year 13 and 14, we had anticipated replacing Deer Path School's parking lot, the one that's behind on the south side of the school, and the school districts. This is reflecting there in year 13, their contribution of $40,000 to do the engineering costs for that parking lot reconstruction. And then in year 14, fiscal year 14, it was to do the parking lot work itself. And they were willing to commit $360,000 of that money was coming from them for that. So it's not like we have other great big grants on the horizon. Those just happen to be more of a collaborative project approach to tackle a parking lot issue.
Aren't those parking lots used probably 95% by the school?
Yes, they are.
So why are we doing them all? I do know that, you know, we own the property and the rest of that, but
It's been a conundrum for us discussion-wise, because that is somewhat of our feeling, that we do utilize those parking lots for softball or overflow
Fourth of
and our
July or
sports
something,
things,
but they're using our parks for their programs as well.
Yes, and so that's the challenge, and though I believe, and Bob, you'd have to correct me if I'm wrong in that, I think that the city has always somewhat partnered on these replacements since the property is still owned by the city, so,
Yeah, I think, Alderman Luby, you're correct, and and this is something that I know the engineering department is gonna try and work on as well, because you're right, they use it completely, or almost completely during the school year. Weekends, evenings, we have more usage with the usage of the park. You do have 4th of July, you do have, the
Minimal.
auto show, and there's some other community events like that. I think the real question comes down to, we do own the property, at what point should it be 60-40, 50-50, 70-30? And we're gonna try and come up with a much more quantitative measure as to exactly who should be paying what.
Because they kind of look at it as theirs.
Well, but we maintain it in
Yeah.
terms of fixing potholes, and
Yeah.
who plows it? Do you recall? Do we plow it, Mary, or do they? School
School
plows it?
School
School
plows it.
plows it,
Yeah.
yeah.
we do we have helped on just the main drive-through for
On
the
the
buses
Hastings.
early, but,
Oh,
Okay,
yeah, for the early morning,
yeah,
Right.
that's-
Through, but
they do all the
they do all the
clearing.
other lots,
yeah.
yeah, okay.
So that's still
Pending.
something, actually, I think engineering's just doing the survey work right now, right?
We put a placeholder in here based on past discussions, but again, I think this is one, gives a great example of where, when you look at the expense side down here, what we're predicting, I think those numbers will change once we begin to revisit the 5-year plan that we had used to put these numbers together, and we finish some of these discussions on some of these larger items and what we do want to do with them. The bottom line, though, really tells the picture, and that is, from here on out, we're in the red in this fund. We do not have a funding mechanism that is stable to support the capital needs of the Parks and Recreation Department.
Do we
So-
have too many parks?
We don't. We really don't. We looked at that in relationship to our surrounding competitive, neighbors, and the reality is, we actually have a lot fewer parks. We only have 6 neighborhood parks compared to most of them have 13 and up.
Right, but we have big parks.
What's that?
We have big parks.
No, actually, we're similar in acreage,
Yeah.
or actually less in acreage than some of our neighbors. So the difference, though, I think what Lake Forest does have is the added enhancement of Lake Forest open lands properties, which actually add to the volume of open space, but as far as from a management perspective, we actually manage a system that's smaller in comparison to most of our neighbors. Glencoe is a great example of a very small town that has greenways, through all their major thoroughfares are quite extensive, and as well as probably they call them more of the pocket parks, but neighborhood parks with swing sets and playgrounds and stuff. We have 6, they have 17.
Could we get a copy of that comparison?
Sure,
That'd be
yeah,
good.
yeah, I can be happy to get that to you. So I don't think we're too large. I also don't, I do think that there's some opportunity for us to talk about what we want to do, and that's part of the summary report here, is we do have to talk about, what do we prioritize, because the reality is we have some limitations.
Yeah,
So-
I'm just looking at formal parks. you
Right.
know.
So we have
Triangle
this-
Park is not a
We have the 6
formal
neighborhood
park.
parks, and we have 2 large community parks.
Yeah.
So that, and then Forest Lakefront, so that's a separate item.
How many other paving projects are in Parks and Rec? I would think, I'm again, new to the city council, that engineering would do paving projects and,
The way it's been set up in the past is that engineering has done all the paving projects. They have been complete replacements. They'll come in, and that's been funded more from the capital fund of the city. But if it's resurfacing, it's just curb, repairs, potholes, that's all been paid for out of the Park and Recreation Fund, so, Park and Public Land
so
Fund.
this is 360,000 for potholes and
This is,
fix-ups?
no, this is taking it down and completely redoing the entire parking lot. One of the challenges at Deer Path is, there's a big safety issue there, because right now there's no corridor, no safe corridor for the kids to exit from the school and come over to the rec center or to get out to their cars. They have to go through parking lots with lots of moving cars. So our goal is to make this a safer campus for everybody's use when we do replace it, and it does need to be replaced. If you drive
So
over
it would
there, it's
be-
in really bad condition, so.
To the issue of who would do it, why wouldn't engineering do it if it were, arguably expert. I mean, we'll talk about Green Bay Road soon, but,
No, but engineering, it helps with the engineering, but we still subcontract it out to do it.
Right.
And we're
Why-
splitting the cost.
From the city's perspective, the policy question is going to be, A, how much does the school pay versus the city pay? And then of the city's portion, how much is going to get charged off to the Park and Public Land Fund versus the general fund?
that's not my question. My question is, why is Parks and Rec doing it, not engineering? Because the money,
Parks and Rec is
Yeah.
not a separate department, and not a
Right.
separate organization. We do not
Engineering
have a
just
park
does the
district.
engineering for the plan.
Right.
Because there's nobody in Parks that
Parks is
does
part of the city.
asphalt work.
It's not
Then-
separate.
Yeah,
Okay,
so all
then-
they do is figure out what the bid is, and then they send it out, and the outside contractor, Baker or
It's similar
somebody
to
does the
what
paving.
building maintenance does for us.
Right.
They do our bids and everything for our roofs, and then we budget it out of Park and Public Land Fund.
I mean,
So-
I think the original reason we set up a Park and Public Land Fund, if I'm not mistaken, was we have to keep impact fees separate.
Correct.
And we had some debt that we put on
Correct.
that we had to keep separate. The debt's obviously paid off. We still have the impact fees that we have to keep separate. But for instance, if you see what we did in last year, is we raised the $500,000 through the general revenue bond, the general obligation bonds, and then paid for the capital expenditures. So,
why is the parking lot part of Parks and Rec?
because it's a parking lot for Parks and Rec. It's at the rec,
Because it's in a park,
it's at the rec center in the
It
field.
backs up a park,
yeah.
community park.
That's
It doesn't, it doesn't back up the middle school.
Well, it
But it does
does.
Well, it
both. The school's in
share
a
it.
park, the city has all the property around the school.
Just like Everett, we did Everett.
Well, okay, wasn't here for
Yeah.
that, so. Okay, so any paving around schools is a,
No,
Parks-
No, Everett has a park,
It's Everett Park over
Everett
there.
Park.
Everett Park, okay.
and Deer Path Park, obviously.
But Cherokee, do they pave that themselves?
Cherokee, the school district 67 paid for that. Sheridan Road School District paid for that because the city, even though we own the property, have no usage for it. It's
For
not
it
a joint
outside,
usage.
right.
So the next slide that I have
Mary,
up here is
before you-
some good
before you
news.
move
Oh,
on,
sorry.
On the last one, you have at the bottom, capital expenditures for number one only. I assume that means priority number one.
That is correct.
And that priority one and priority two sort of filters through here periodically. Could you explain the difference between priority one and priority two?
Sure. Well, priority one was items that we felt they had reached the end of their useful life or had safety issues for us, and they, really would impact our ability to deliver services. So we do go through our capital every year, and we label them priorities 1, 2, and 3. So what's shown up here always is just priority one in this particular scenario, similar to what we did with all the other funds. But that doesn't mean there aren't items that are priority two this year that aren't going to be funded, that we'll need to revisit next year if they don't get done this year, because they might become a one next year, and a one might have to, move off a little bit. So that is the conundrum, I guess, because we have a lot more need than we have funding, and we have to reprioritize on a regular basis, especially if unknowns come up, with challenges that we hadn't anticipated, so.
But anything we funded with that GO bond was a priority one.
It was
I
a
mean, there's
priority
lot
one,
more than-
correct.
There's a lot more than 250,000 this year, priority ones that are being covered by the
Yes.
city.
Right, this chart will not show the $500,000 under fiscal year 11, because that is in a separate bond fund already. It was issued and it's tracked separately, and its expenses will be tracked separately as well.
So priority one is essentially a year-by-year analysis because something may, as you said, move up.
Right,
Okay.
right.
I think Alderman Grumhouse, one of the problems, and Mary and Kathy and I talked about this, is there's actually three funds that are financing capital projects. You have the rec fund, you have the general fund, or the bond fund in that case, because we did issue bonds, and then you have the park and public land funds as well.
And we can't run the bond funds through here because that technically,
Kathy will kill you.
right. But even with an asterisk, we couldn't run the funds through here.
She could probably set up a separate Excel account that would show the
Okay.
combined for that, but she needs to keep the bond funds separate from park and public land funds. And then the rec funds, we could,
Right.
they're property tax supported as well, so.
So this next slide is actually some good news slide. In this one, I wanted to share with you, there's the Recreation Fund 220, which is where we run all of our operating revenues and expenses out of that. This slide here shows you that currently, at the end of this past fiscal year, ending in April 30th, we had a surplus of $559,164 of excess operational revenue available that was after we've done our 15% reserve requirement. So that is money
Is that
that,
including the 250,000 in savings? Did I miss that?
yes, that
It's
would include our,
included.
yes, so
That's
that
in there.
would reflect some of our $250,000 savings.
Gotcha.
Though I have to say, the Park and Forestry merger is not in that number yet, because we had to pay out the, that person when they left, we had to pay out all their sick and vacation and everything. We will not utilize or realize those monies till this next year. So, so that money does reflect where we stand right now as an additional surplus beyond the 15% reserve that's required, that we would like to recommend, as you're gonna, as saw in your packet, that this be something that we be allowed to put back into the system for capital, so there'd be that much less drain or need for, bond support or other funding mechanisms to assist us with that. So that is some good news, and I think part of this reflects some of the hard work that came out of the cost of services studies that City Council asked the rec department to look into, and we eliminated programs that weren't netting as much as they could, and we also made adjustments with not filling a few of our full-time positions and stuff. So this next slide is the capital expense history. Again, it's a 10-year history. And I bring this to your, you saw the chart that earlier had revenue and expense together on it. I wanted to highlight this one because as part of my proposal here tonight is that I really feel that in order for us to at least maintain the most critical assets, that we need to be in this range right through here, the $600,000 to $800,000 level. If we dip much lower, whoops, didn't mean to click there, I'll go back. If we dip much lower than that, I really feel that we're going to not be able to take care of many of the assets that we have, and we're going to have some significant problems throughout our system, and that we're not asking to go up into these large levels and do a lot of new things or a lot of gigantic big projects. We're just looking to try to find the best way to maintain the most critical level of assets that we have. And as has been said, we've been spending on average, $600,000, around $600,000 for really the last 15 years, and we've had difficulty keeping pace. So that's, I wanted to just visually show that chart to you.
Is most of that buildings, new roof, new air conditioning, heating, in paving or things like that, rather than
Correct.
stuff in the parks?
That's correct. There's been very little put in as far as playgrounds and things like that, but that's why we have the expenses coming up side of it, because we do need to begin to look at some of those and make sure those are addressed as safety issues arise.
But our buildings currently then are pretty much up to date.
No.
They're
no.
not. They're not like the train station, though, are they? We're better than that.
Some are close.
Yeah, we have, we've already replaced Northcroft, and we replaced the Deer Path preschool playground that was there. The three oldest parks that we still have is Waveland's in the worst condition. The next two oldest are West Park and South Park. I originally, when I put this together 3 years ago, tried to look at, we would try to replace each of our playgrounds one every year, so we could get them all back up to speed and not have any safety concerns, and really get them up to where we'd have another 15-year or 20-year window for replacement again. And so we really do have three parks that, we had anticipated replacing by now because they are 20 years old. And Waveland's is the worst condition. However, that's one of the things I'll be talking with the park board, is that may not be realistic. If you go to South Park, the playground is still in very good condition. We don't have any serious safety issues being reported there. So that's an example of one where I think we could probably push it out a little bit further, maybe make it 5 years or 7 years, and revisit that in a few years and see if that's still appropriate versus doing it, the next 2 years.
But the structure at South Park's good.
The structure at South Park is
So
good.
those things are good. We're just looking at updating the children's parks. Playground equipment. or
That's what I'm
whatever.
talking about,
Right.
is playground
That's what I
equipment,
meant.
right.
Tennis
right.
courts are huge,
Well, tennis, that's a whole nother,
and we've
yeah.
done a lot in the last couple of years on some tennis
Right.
courts, right?
Right,
And
those
we've
are
got
gonna
more
be,
to do.
they're gonna be still a challenging discussion that is yet to happen. We've been crack sealing at Waveland and at South Park and at Deer Path to continue to keep those in operation. So those are some of the kinds of things that we have in the system, but, it's it's sad to see how much money we have to spend on some of the things that you never get to see, you know, the rooftop units or replacing windows and stuff, but that is the reality, and some of our buildings are very old, so. So this is a brief list for, to share with council as far as our capital funding options, and we just lay them out there for discussion or consideration. You know, we can continue to rely on impact fees, but I think if you do that, it's the park board, in my opinion, that you would have to do significant system reductions in order to be able to use impact fees only. You could utilize surplus operational fund balances. You saw we have $550,000 currently. You could issue debt. You can shift real estate transfer tax from other city capital funds to the Park and Public Land Fund, but quite honestly, you're probably just creating a different issue on another side of the operation for the city. And the property tax increase, which we know is very challenging in today's climate. And the last is a combination funding approach, which is really where the park board and myself is coming to you tonight with this recommendation for that. And that is, what we're proposing is that we try to get some stability into the system and have us level the expenses and needs that we have, and put together a 5-year plan, knowing that we have some stability and some parameters around what we could or could not do. And from that, we're recommending that we utilize the recreation excess operational funds that we have, potentially any impact fees, whatever those might be, and grants to fund priority 1 and possibly priority 2 capital needs, depending on how the list finally shapes up. And that we would say do approximately $100,000 a year, because we usually been doing a 5-year plan at a time, and that would allow us to put at least $100,000 a year towards it from the operational side. The second approach, combination then would to be to issue debt for the remaining priority 1 or the priority 1 capital needs as we see, to the tune of approximately $500,000 to $750,000, and this would be issued biannually, so that we would only receive like $500,000 of it a year, to come into the total, and that would give us then that range of $650,000 to $800,000 a year to prioritize and fund park and recreation needs for the next 5 years. Okay, and I'll keep going. So what we do still have to finish for City Council is that we need to bring the naming rights policy back before City Council for your discussion and your approval. And we also would like to have you look and approve an intergovernmental program agreement with the Lake Bluff Park District, which was on a slide earlier, but I didn't go over it much in depth. But we're looking at opportunities where we can partner and put our communities together for the enhancement of both, communities. Girls' sports in particular is one we've already started with, and we've done a variety of other sport programs recently with them too, and the Wildlife Discovery Center as well. We will be conducting the Neighborhood Park Open House at the end of September. We'll be working together to revise the 5-year capital improvement plan that we bring back to you guys in November. And we would like City Council, obviously, to finalize what direction they would see us heading as part of the budget process this next year, beginning with the November meeting. And based on the feedback council gives us and the direction that they like us to do, what our opportunities are, then we would like to finalize what we're calling the report to the community, which would kind of give them an overview of our park system, what we learned and what we heard from the residents at the open house, what we anticipate as our capital plan for the next 5 years and the priorities, and really try to bring the community along with us in understanding where we're headed and what we'll be doing and what some of the limitations we do have. Because I will tell you that weekly I get calls from residents who are asking for new things, and or why we can't take care of something, and I'm explaining to them that we have severe limitations right now. We're not looking to really engage in a lot of new things, but really take care of what we have, and that we will have to prioritize even those items that we have. We'll have to either stretch the replacement of them or eliminate some of our assets in our park system. And with that, that's it. I guess I would open it up for any other questions and discussion that you have.
Mary, I know when I was on the Parks and Rec board, the biggest challenge was communication. I never felt we did very well in communicating with a lot of our residents who have never been in a park. And I know at that time when I was on chairman, there were people on city council that had never been in some of our parks. And I'm not claiming that's this group, because I know they're all well-educated and walk around our parks. But I think, through the ward meetings, I think we need to do a good sales job, very similar to what District 67 did in 115 when they did their additions to the schools and how they educated the residents that didn't have kids in the schools to get behind these things, because what we hear, and Tom and I have heard recently is, we can't get 60 cut, but you're spending this money on a park. I don't care about a park. I need the grass cut on 60. Those kind of things. My challenge to you and the board is really going out there and doing a sales job, because it's going to be needed, because there is a big portion of our residents that either don't care or don't go and use the parks, and they are falling apart, and they need help.
And
That's my comment.
I hope the city council will consider joining the park board. They are going to go out and tour the park in their ward prior to the open house that we're having in September. And we'd love to have you guys join the park board member and actually visually go out and see those parks that are in your ward. I think it will be a good helpful thing for you when questions do come your way. And we invite all residents to actually try to go out and see and look at things a little more closely. It is challenging, though, if you don't go to the golf course, you don't necessarily look at the roofs, or you don't understand that the HVAC humidification system has been down for months at the rec center. I mean, those are kinds of things that are hard to educate. So we do have to do more than just visually look. We're going to have to do these presentations on a regular basis and try to get that word out there. I think we're headed in the right direction with the park board, and the new park board members each time say to me they're so surprised that they didn't understand how this department was funded. They had no idea how it was funded. They just assumed your property taxes funded the capital program, and I said no, it's all been based really primarily on impact fees and donations. So those are changes that I don't think a lot of people have the background in, that need to understand that's no longer there for us, and we have to come up with some new strategies. And that's really where the park board is looking to the city council. We need to come up with a long-term strategy here, not something that changes every year, and you can't plan appropriately, and you can't put some parameters around your planning. So that would be our hope with working with you.
Just a suggestion would be, we do the mailing with all the programs that goes out a couple of times a year. You might want to, in the first 1 or 2 pages, kind of give an update on the parks. Because there's so many homes that get it and say, I don't have any kids, I'm not doing it, and they throw it out. Where if you had something in there, they might open it up and look and see what's going on in their parks and do some pictures of things that are going on, and kind of bring it in their doorstep, since you're doing the mailing anyway.
Absolutely. I mean, we did start with, we have now a page devoted to park news in there, but we put the open house inside the front cover this time, and we can
Yeah.
certainly do more of that type
Get
of
more of
awareness.
that in there with, some pictures and things. I think those that are signing up for the classes will find that in the middle anyway. But you might want to get all those homes where they really don't use the parks. And I think we have a tremendous number of people who may be walking around a park, but they never actually use it in the town,
That'd be great.
David, how have we allocated bond proceeds? Or how's that process going about every year, where we
I think, and I was going to
Selected
talk about this,
or
I
whatever.
think the decision was made with the telecom tax to move it back into the city council and have Parks and Rec essentially forecast their capital expenditures and applies are not the right words, but apply for the allocation of funds, just like the other departments do it. And I think the reasoning for that was, we all knew we were going to be under tremendous pressure for capital expenditures as the economy turned down here, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't have a big allocation to Parks and Rec when we desperately needed it for roads and we needed it for other stuff. And so that was a decision the council made a couple years ago, that not that we were trying to cut Parks and Rec out, but that just we thought they should be part of the regular 5-year process like everybody else was. I think it's fully been the expectation of the council that the parks are really important, and we need to continue to fund those capital expenditures. I'm sure Mary and the park board feel like you say that, but with the budget stuff, we really never know what exactly we're going to get and when we're going to get squeezed and not get squeezed. And there's probably some truth to that. you know, obviously last year we made the decision, you know, one of the recommendations of the committee was that we needed to do some catch-up stuff because we were behind on stuff, and that was, you know, part of the reason we took the $500,000 in proceeds from the last bond issue and allocated it towards park capital expenditures. You know, I think the question going forward is, you know, obviously, you know, what you all are proposing here is that we, rather than do that, we just sort of agree to sort of put, you know, 600 to 800 annually into the fund and just worry about financing that and worry that, you know, that's the proper allocation to Parks and Rec, and we'll have to worry about the other stuff elsewhere. You know, I think that's something we're gonna have to think about. You know, I think part of the reason is I completely understand that you all are, you know, don't like the unpredictability of your financing and it makes it hard to plan. Unfortunately, the whole city's under that same thing. You know, we don't know what we're gonna get in the transfer tax. You know, you look at how that thing's yo-yoed back and forth. You know, we don't exactly know what we're gonna do from a bond financing point of view. We obviously have limits on the bond financing because we've made a pretty strong pledge that we're not gonna raise property taxes. So what we, you know, what we're basically financing is stuff that's rolling off. So, you know, I think that's something that the council's gonna have to think about and take under advisement is whether we wanna sort of change the system that we went to a few years ago. You know, the impact fees also make it difficult. You're right, we're largely built out. We do have 3 or 4 very large projects that are gonna generate at some point. And, you know, I think we're under no illusions it's gonna be anytime soon, but my guess is if you look at Barrow and Laurel Avenue and Whitestable, that you've probably got multi-million dollars of impact fees coming from that. Now, we may not see those hit for 5 or 10 years, but at some point, that's obviously gonna generate a fair amount of revenue for expenditures. And, you know, I think the reaction of the ad hoc when we looked at it was, that should really be stuff that's for new stuff, and that, you know, that when we eventually get that stuff, that, you know, that will be the opportunity to try and do some really big improvements, you know, whether it's new types of fields, or whether it's, you know, buildings, or, you know, different longer-term, bigger-term capital expenditures that people want. But, you know, again, I don't think anyone knows whether that's gonna be 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years when those things are gonna hit. So.
David, I would just remind, though, our capital list goes through the same vetting process with all the other capitals on the exact same day. So comprehensively, the city is always looking at capital, whether it's in, you know, the general fund, or whether it's in the Park and Public Land Fund, or the bond fund, or what have you. It is a process. Every year we know we have to come before you and justify our priorities and what amount of money we would get. So it's not as if we're saying, we know that, you know, we automatically are gonna get that money and we can always spend it. We still have to show the projects and show the dire need in order to spend those monies. And, you know, the problem that I think the challenge we're gonna have is that it's not gonna come close to really probably even meeting all of our needs, but we also realize there's realities today with how much we can spend and what the city has the capability of doing, because we are only one department, and,
Right.
you know, we're trying to understand and work within the comprehensive scope of the whole city's needs. So, you know, those are gonna be, you know, we will be coming and would be bringing you every year a list that you would vet and improve, just like we always have done, so.
But as we did, I mean, I agree, we talked about this a couple of years ago, and we recognized that this day was kind of coming. And I think the city, with a number of topics, whether it be the transfer tax or Greg's example of the high school or other things, where the cases need to be made that this is an important asset for the city, which I think the majority of the people do, perhaps we need to consider some alternatives and longer-term funding sources. If the current, because rather than just simply tapping into our available bonding capacity, that to me is a difficult way to keep going. That's an easy answer for those of us that don't want to make hard decisions, but, you know, I think parks was a topic we recognized that the majority of the citizens of our community here felt that was a very, very important asset. It's something that distinguishes Lake Forest. It's something that people move here for. And in fact, we had to plan for its longer-term viability. And I think, you know, that's the policy question I put before the council, that I'd rather see us tackle that than just say, let's add another $500,000 a year of debt capacity, or give you this. I don't know if that's a good enough answer right now. And I know we have to weigh that, and we can weigh that as we weigh other capital, but I think I distinctly remember a couple of years ago in the discussions on this, about talking about finding a longer-term sustainable revenue source for the parks. We did talk about that, and maybe it's a hard
I think the
conversation
challenge
to
is
have.
nobody can find out really
I
decide
think
what that should be
I think the
because
only
there's
thing
just
that-
limited
But-
financial
but-
tools, so.
I mean, the only thing that is to raise taxes.
I recognize it's finding an alternative. We did that by raising a transfer tax for infrastructure. We've done it on other topics where the need has been there and been demonstrated. And I actually, part of the plan here, I applaud you, Mary, for, I think this does need to be taken to the citizens. I think it needs to be vetted. It needs to be in the community. It needs to be a topic that says we have some hard choices to start making. Because we do have hard choices.
But I guess my question to you, Tom, is why is that different than what we need to do for roads, or what we need to do for, sewer lining, or anything like that? Why should this be prioritized in front of that?
I think I'm just recalling the discussion of a couple of years ago that we felt that was a unique asset to this community and one that people in fact moved here and stayed here because of that asset.
I think Mary said that we're behind the curve. Actually, people would be leaving to go to Glencoe and other, Deerfield, I think you mentioned in another meeting. They have better parks.
Yeah, they don't have Forest Beach. I mean,
No, I know, I'm just saying that it's a,
We have
but I
a
think she
number
was
of
mentioning
I'll
things.
put that against anyone, so.
Route 60.
I have I think it's, from a financing standpoint, I think it's always a short-term mistake to have earmarked funds going to a particular department. I think I'm
And that was the
reciting what you're
thinking.
talking about. I think the general fund in, whether it's charity work or business work or the other things that I've been involved with, it's very difficult to have a stream that's earmarked and not have it be part of general decision-making. And I think it's when things like that happen, whatever the life is or whatever the vehicle is, it usually has a life and a legal ramification associated with it if it's, depending on how it works. And times change. And to not have it go through a general fund and be allocated, I'm not sure if I'm repeating what you said, but
Yeah.
but I think it's to say that the transfer tax should only be used for this, or the impact fee should only be used for this, I think is difficult when the sewers explode in a year and people don't care about the tennis courts being resurfaced as much. I mean, it's in
I don't
a bubble.
disagree with your point. I mean,
Okay.
I don't disagree with that at all, and maybe I wasn't making my point clear.
It sounded like we were
My-
drifting toward finding a new.
My point wasn't
Specific sources.
to say that we find specific sources, but if we're gonna just keep adding to our debt without dealing.
But we're not adding to our debt, right? We're refunding new debt.
Right,
It's debt that's coming off that we're rolling.
Oh, okay. Well,
right.
I missed the first part of the meeting.
Yeah, that's right. And the only other thing I would add to Alderman Moore's comments is that there are certain revenues that have to be earmarked, impact fees
Right.
being one. They have to go towards these kinds of improvements. So
Right.
we don't have a choice there. But I think the real question is that the municipal pie is only so big. And we either have to grow that pie through a levy increase or issuing more debt and so on and so forth, or we have to talk about how we're gonna make tougher choices and reallocate resources towards Park and Rec and take them away from something else. And those are some of the challenges I think we've got going forward. I think the biggest challenge that I think Mary is trying to point out here is that we're not talking about just trying to shift $10,000 or $20,000. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we've been very fortunate over the last 15, 20 years that we have had growth, and we've been able to offset the cost of these projects through either grant dollars or impact fees or other development-related fees. Well, those days have now gone, and so now we have to decide going forward, how are we gonna continue to maintain these assets, much like we have to talk about how we're gonna contain the roads and the sewers and so on and so forth.
And Kathy Reinerson asked me to remind you that she will be sharing with you the bond picture, at your next upcoming meeting. That will give you a little better sense of the debt, the city debt, and what's rolling off, and what will be available, so that you'll have hopefully more pieces of the puzzle. As I mentioned tonight, it was just for an informational purposes. to get the topic up there, get you up to speed a little bit on what the work's been done so far. And I do want to commend the park board and the staff for 9 months. We have really delved into a lot of information, a lot of, expenses and revenues, and where do we go from here discussions. And it's been a good process. It's really been a good one. And I appreciated the work that the ad hoc committee did in helping us, point us down a path to do that kind of work, so.
Mary, I'd like to obviously follow up on that too, and thank you for all your hard work, all the smiling faces there from staff that came out tonight. And of course, our parks are a real asset to the community, I think, as Alderman mentioned. I mean, our beach is probably premier to nowhere else in northern Illinois. And who else has a baby bobcat, I heard now? Is that right, Rob? I mean, we're the only one in northern Illinois for that, I think, too. So
The
obviously
former
it's
Prime Minister of Canada was here this weekend to see it.
Oh, fantastic.
I would just echo those. Oh, I'm sorry.
One more quick comment, but I did have a quick question. I know we're getting to the end of our time, but you're looking for about $600,000 to $800,000 a year. Have you given any thought to how much could be raised through the naming rights or any of those creative options?
No, and those are the kinds of things, if we had those come up, then we would know that that could be plugged in, and that might be where a year we wouldn't have to roll any debt for us, or, those kinds of, they're the unknowns. And we don't typically put in our forecast things that we don't have some certainty that, they're going to come to be. But those are the flexible things that might come up, that might either allow us to take on a few other projects that have gone to 2s or 3s, or allow us to not have to do so much debt on behalf of the department, or issue, do other funding mechanisms, whatever is deemed appropriate. But yeah, those are opportunities that we've never had it before. So where we go with it and what the interest will be of that is going to be interesting to see.
As we're going to speak to in the council meeting tonight is to the Adopt the Park program, which we have some interested folks in the community that want to step up and donate their contributions financially and their time and efforts. And that may be a huge opportunity as well. If you get a little momentum behind that other benefactors will step forward, and hopefully that will be the case. So obviously it's a big unknown when we talk about all these dollars, and
right.
we don't know where that's going to go, but we do know that there are people interested in doing it. So that's very positive, and that's something very special again for Lake Forest, and hopefully that can be the benefit that we're looking for.
Correct.
What kind of money, the foundation is new, what kind of money is that bringing in?
Right now, around $25,000 a year.
So that was it after the huge 4th of July event?
They've just hit their stride this year and now charging the admission fee, so that brought them around. We don't have the
Keep
final
seeing the
numbers, but
Sunshine
between
Band's
25
not
and
cheap.
40,000.
No, I was just curious, because I think when you get into the naming, it may take away from those donors, putting into the other programs. Because there's only so many in the pie out there that you can get money from.
It would be terrific to have a few more big sponsors step up for that event, just because it is an expensive event. There's many, things and expenses that come along with running an event that 8,000 people attend. So those are challenges, but, it's also, we do generate now, starting this year, made it through the hump of our learning curve and found a way, again, to find a consistent way to collect money each year through the gate. And then in addition, have our corporate sponsorships on top of that. And that was necessary in order to break even or make money off that event.
It's a great city event, though. I mean, it's great for the
is.
community, and I think when you look at some of the benefit from that, it's worth even more to the community, plus the money that's raised.
There's a misunderstanding with that. They think that the city funds it all, and we have to explain, no, that is a fundraiser, and it's done by the efforts of residents like you who put this event on and try to raise the money to offset it. So that we have still learning curves and teach everybody about what our system, what we do support. I mean, we're the underlying support of many special events in town, Lake Forest Day and the Antique Auto Show and the Infant Welfare Society. I mean, we do a lot of support for community events, allow them to also fundraise in town and be successful in the community as well. So,
quick question.
Yeah, Ken.
Very quick. With the Adaptive Park, obviously getting money for naming rights is interesting. Some communities, Chicago, lease space in the beach area for restaurants, alternate food service. Has Lake Forest or the park board look towards leasing maybe small areas of the beach for alternate food service to raise money?
We haven't. I know when I first arrived, we did entertain or look at the concept of enclosing the north pavilion, for instance, and making that kind of a restaurant facility. I know before I arrived, they actually did a design of doing a very large yacht slash restaurant type facility down the south end that could be a year-round enterprise fund on behalf of the department that would be quite unique and could be quite special. The challenge is parking down there and the other, you know, the trade-off, you're losing a pavilion for, you know, dinner for a restaurant kind of thing. So we haven't really done a whole lot with that, though. I mean, we brainstormed, but that's about it.
Yeah, but I mean, if someone came in with the idea of funding a project on a lease term, the city might be interested in it as a
Sure. I mean, we
revenue
do the
source.
concessions now at the lake and at the golf course, and, you know, I think privatization opportunities are always something we would be willing to entertain and take a look at.
Thanks.
Thank you. We're running a bit over our allotted time, but right now I'd like to ask, give an opportunity for public comment. And if there's no public comment, I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned, 5 minutes.